Shalom, shalom. I am Pastor Juanita Weiss, and it is such a delight to be with you again. And certainly I greet you in that name that is above every other name. And that name is the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. And I am with Malchut Chaim Messianic Congregation in Chesapeake, Virginia, where my husband, Rabbi David, is our leader. And so we are so excited to bring to you another installment, another lesson in the Besorah according to Matisyahu. And we are looking at this Besorah, we're looking at it through Jewish lenses. So I invite you to get your Bibles, get your pens, your notebooks. Let's go ahead and look through Jewish lenses and see what the Lord would speak to us. Now, we are in Matthew 26, and we're nearing the end of the Besorah according to Matisyahu. And what's interesting in this particular portion, we see several individuals. It's almost like you get a biological study of some of those who were connected with Yeshua in whatever way. But you get this biological study because now the religious leaders, we see Caiaphas, we see the high priest, the chief priests and the elders, they have gotten together now, the Nasim, these are the leaders of the various tribes there, and they've gotten together and now they're plotting to kill Yeshua, to assassinate him, but they don't want to do it during the feast because you've got millions of people now in Jerusalem, and they know that the population, if you will, the Amharites, they love Yeshua, and they have some idea what would happen if they try to take him during the feast. And because Caiaphas is in league with Rome, he needs to make sure that there is no riot during this time. And so they have a choice. The religious leaders have a choice. Then we see that Yeshua loves to go into Bethany. So he didn't stay in Jerusalem, but he goes into Bethany, which is not far from Jerusalem. And there, his friends are there, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. But he goes into the home of Shimon HaMitzorah. And we talked about him, Simon the leper, he is called. Now, they made a choice as well. Shimon HaMitzorah, and there's every indication that he is probably one of the lepers that was healed by Yeshua, but he makes this choice to honor Yeshua. They throw a huge party for him, a banquet, if you will, and it is believed from historians that all of those from Bethany who knew Yeshua, and most of them did, they came to this party as well in honor of Yeshua. Shimon HaMitzorah had a choice, and he chose to honor Yeshua. The people of Bethany had a choice, and they chose to honor him. And then comes this woman into Shimon HaMitzorah's house, and she has this alabaster box. We talked about the costliness of it, that it was worth really, and the spikenard that was inside was worth a year's wages. And she breaks it over Yeshua's head. She just kind of breaks the bottle like that, snaps it, and outruns this ointment upon his head. And she honors him. And now even the Talmudim have a choice. What are they going to do about this? Well, they did what probably a lot of us would have done. Wow, this is wasteful, Yeshua. Do you know during this season of Pesach how many people we could feed? Because during Pesach, that's what you would normally do. And they said this should have been sold, given to the poor, so that they would have something during this season. And Yeshua says, leave her alone. Don't bother her. What she has done is to anoint me for burial, actually, because this is really the only time that he gets this prior to his entombment, if you will. And so he says, leave her alone, because what she has done will be spoken wherever the gospel is preached, taught, told. And remember, there was no gospel written at the time, but Yeshua makes this prophecy about the gospel that will be told about him, written about him. And he says, wherever it is written or told, it would be for a memorial, a zikaron for this woman. And so 2,000 years later, we're still talking about her. 2,000 years later, they're still writing songs about this woman who was so captivated by the presence of Yeshua. And we don't even know what he did for her, right? If he healed her of anything, all we know is that she had such extravagant love for him, such as extravagant love that she wanted to show it. And so she shows it by pouring upon him this ointment. And then now this brings us to our study at present. And I want to use as a centering theme for this, Hebrews 10:7. This is what Hebrews 10:7. It says, then said I, lo, I come in the volume of the book. It is written of me to do thy will, O God. Now, this really speaks of the Messiah. It's what Yeshua says about himself, right? I've come in the volume of the book. There's something written about me, and I've come to do that which has been written about me. So as Yeshua walks out his life, guess what he's doing? He is doing that which is written about him. And I just want to say to you, as you're listening, in the volume of the book, it's written of us, right? We too are written there, and we have choices. We have a choice to make, just as the religious leaders did, just as the woman with the alabaster box did, just as the disciples did when they see this woman and they claim that it's so wasteful what she's doing, and then Yeshua has to chide them, and we have a choice. Like Shimon HaMetzora, we can honor him. Like the people of Bethany, if you know someone that's honoring Yeshua, it's like, yes, I want to be a part of that. Or we can be like Judas Iscariot. So let's take a look at what is spoken of him. Do want to, let's see, we just have to bring this up here. And so this is what it says in Matthew 27:14. Then one of the 12, the one called Judah of Creote, went to the ruling Kohanim and said, what are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you? And they weighed out 30 shekels of silver for him. From then on, Judah began looking for a chance to hand him over. I think that Matthew is painting a stark contrast between these biological figures that we just named and Judas. But what we see here is that we have the religious leaders who are now conspiring to assassinate Yeshua. And then we have the people of Bethany. Then we have the woman, Mary, with the ointment. And then we have the Talmudim. And now we have Judas. And so sandwiched in between those whose choices were for the master to the degree that they could make, that they understood such a choice, right? I'm talking about especially the Talmudim. In their understanding, they were doing right in saying that this money could be used to feed the poor. But according to Yeshua, what Mary was doing at that time was the right thing. So in chapter 28, verse 12, And when they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of silver to the soldiers. Because now, when we take a look at Matthew 28:12, Judas is like those soldiers that the elders paid to lie about the body of Yeshua. Now Judas is going to be paid by these same individuals. Now in chapter 25:18, verse 18, but the one who received one went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. So in this one, when Yeshua is telling this parable, we see that this one who hides his master's money doesn't really care about his master's funds, because what the master wants him to do is to create more, right? To create more, to invest, to use it for the kingdom, but instead he buries it. So you've got these individuals, Judas now selling out Yeshua. Then you're going to have the soldiers who are accepting a bribe to tell a lie. And then you have this individual in Yeshua's parable who cared nothing for the master's money, his master's money. In chapter 10 of Matthew 9-10, it also says this, which shows us again the regard for the money that belongs to the kingdom. Yeshua says, do not get gold or silver or copper for your money belts, or a bag for your journey, or 2 shirts or sandals, or a walking stick, for the worker is entitled to his food. Now, there is this individual who worries about preserving his own. If Judas was among this group, whom Yeshua says, when you go out, don't try to get gold or silver or put all of this in your money belts. But look at what Judas does. He does exactly what Yeshua tells his Talmudim not to do. Because when you do this against the master's consent or warning or even teaching, you're worrying about preserving your own. You're not worried about what your master has said. So when he is betraying a tie to loyalty for the sake of a bribe. This is what Judas is doing. He's betraying a tie to loyalty. When he followed Yeshua, he in a sense says, I am loyal to you. And now he is betraying that loyalty. He's going against Torah by betraying one of his own. And we know that according to Torah, loyalty is of the highest value because traitors were hated. So that gives you an idea of how they regarded even the tax collectors. They were traitors to the Jewish people, and they were hated even by family members. Traitors were hated. And now Judas, with his eyes wide shut, as they say, is walking right into this place of being hated, not only by those who would know him at this time, but even those who would come after him. Now, it's very interesting. John 12:4 says, but Judah from Creote, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him. So John is basically saying that Judas had already intended to betray Yeshua, that it was already in his heart to do. Matthew says he was motivated out of greed. So you can imagine that as he sees Yeshua accepting and consenting to what he would deem the wastefulness of the money that they could get from the spikenard that was poured upon Yeshua, you can imagine that if he is motivated by greed, then he is incensed at what he has seen. Matthew says it was greed. John says he had already intended to do this, and both Luke and John link him to Hasatan. They both say it was Satan who caused him to make these choices, because it was Hasatan, he says, that had entered into him. So Luke 23:3 says, then Satan entered into Judas, the one from Creote, one of the 12. Wow. Just, I can imagine what it was like even for the Talmudim to write that, to conceptualize that, even after the fact. This is what Mark says in Mark 14:11. Mark says, then Judah from Creote, one of the 12, went out to the ruling Kohanim to betray Yeshua to them. They were delighted when they heard this and promised to give him money, and Judah began looking for a chance to hand him over. So notice this. The religious leaders were seeking to arrest him, capture him, with the end result to assassinate him, but they did not want to do it during the feast. Can you see now how Judas is playing right into their desire now, because they don't want to cause a riot? So Judas comes to them saying, how much would you give me to betray him? And they were delighted. Why? Because now they have someone on the inside, and it's going to be easier to get him, to capture him, to accost him, if you will. Luke 22:5-6 says, they were delighted and agreed to give him money. So he agreed and began looking for a chance to hand Yeshua over to them without a crowd. This is what Luke says. So that it's also playing into the hands of the religious leaders, because they didn't want a crowd. And now Judas, he can get close to him. He's one of the 12. And that's what the Talmudim, the writers of the Besorah, keep telling us, that he was one of the 12. And as one of the 12, he could get close to Yeshua. So in verse 15, and they weighed out 30 shekels of silver for him. From then on, Judah began looking for a chance to hand him over. What is the opportune time? He's looking for this. Now, they're going right into the Passover Seder. This is the Passover season, and Judas Iscariot is looking for the prime opportunity to betray him, to hand him over. Now, let's take a look at this 30 shekels of silver. Exodus 21:32 says that 30 pieces of silver was the compensation for a slave, to be paid for a slave gored by an ox. So if you had a slave and he was gored by an ox, and that was your ox, and you now have to pay compensation to the owner of the slave, because now the slave is almost useless, if you will, to the owner, you would pay 30 pieces of silver. So there is that comparison that is being made to Yeshua, a slave gored by an ox, one who becomes useless, who becomes almost worthless. But then there's the flip side of this. In Zechariah 11:12-13, the 30 pieces of silver is equated with the wages of a shepherd. So now in this particular passage, Hashem wants to rid the land of bad shepherds. And so he says to the people, look, if you think me good, then give me my price. What would be the price of a good shepherd? And so they weighed out 30 pieces of silver. Wow. What an opposition here. a useless slave or almost useless slave to a good shepherd, that they weigh out his use or his worth, his value, and that's worth 30 shekels of silver. Now, as we're looking at this and understanding this silver, and especially linking it back to the woman with the alabaster box, one silver coin in circulation at the time was the rough equivalent of 4 denarii. And 1 denarius, as we know, was a day's wage for a laborer. So that 1 silver shekel is worth 4 denarii, and a denarius was a day's wage for a laborer. So the fee mentioned here, according to Jill Levine, is 120 days worth of wages. So Judas is getting in his little purse 120 days worth of wages for Yeshua. And this woman, remember her, the one with the alabaster box? Her alabaster box, her spikenard inside, was worth a year's wages. And it was nothing for her to pour out a year's wages upon Yeshua because of her adoration for him. And certainly Judas is not motivated by adoration, even though we understand that for a good shepherd, according to Zechariah, the wages would be 30 pieces of silver, or the worth or the value. So what's Judas's motivation here? Because there have been so many commentaries written about what Judas's motivation was. Was it all about what he could get out of Yeshua? At the end of the day, Yeshua has said 4 times, I am going to die. I'm going to go in Jerusalem. I'm going to be handed over. I'm going to die. But he always said, and on the 3rd day, I will rise again. So Judas is thinking, there's nothing else we're in Jerusalem now. He's made his death so imminent. What can I get out of him? Or how could I serve him? Right? That's maybe what some would think. Well, how can I serve him? Not what can I get out of him? But remember, Matthew says he was motivated by greed. And if so, then seeing what this woman did, this woman with this alabaster box, that would have incensed him. And now he wants something out of the deal. So Yeshua's kingdom has not been a profit to him monetarily. It hasn't even been a profit to him materially. That's not what Yeshua came to do, is it? Yeshua came for the heart. He came to change the heart. But Yeshua's ministry has not been a profit to Judas. And Yeshua is consenting to waste what Judas deems as a waste. And granted, the other Talmudim considered it a waste as well. But Yeshua seems to consent to that waste. And beloved, as I was reading that, I'm like, Yeshua says, Hashem says, be ye holy. And I would add to that, but don't try to be holier than God. If you don't understand something he's done or something he's doing, don't try to outsmart God. Don't try to move beyond what he's doing. Yeshua says, leave her alone. What she has done is for me. And what she has done will be written and told about wherever my story is being told. And so when Judas realizes that Yeshua going into Jerusalem will cost Yeshua's life. And then remember, Yeshua had told them, it's like, they're going to drag you into, they may drag you out of the synagogues. You may have to go before kings. If they hated me, they're going to hate you, and none of this. If you're motivated out of greed, if, as Luke and John said, that Hasatan entered into him, and if that is so, then he's being ruled by the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and no wonder it doesn't sound good to him. It doesn't sound right to him. It doesn't seem as if there's an advantage to him. So he chooses to get what he still can from his lengthy investment in Yeshua. He has invested 3 years with Yeshua. They all have. And at the end of 3 years, he has no money to show for it. He has no material worth to show for it. And now he has 120 days worth of wages to put into his coin purse. Is it worth it? Behold, I come in the volume of the book. It is written of me to do thy will, O God. That's what Yeshua says. What is it for you, Judas? Judas had a choice. You always have a choice. Every day we get a choice. We choose the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. We choose the Yetzer HaTov. We choose the good inclination. Every day we have a choice. And Hasatan actually presents us with a choice. And we can always choose. We can always choose Torah. We can always choose Hashem. And I love it that when a righteous man falls, if he falls 7 times, every time he can get back up. You don't have to stay where you are if you fall. So let's look at 17 through 19, because as we said, this is the Pesach season. And so it was prophetic, of course, that Yeshua would go into Jerusalem during the Pesach, during the season of Pesach, and that he would lay down his life. So it says in verse 17, now on the first day of Matzah, the disciples came to Yeshua saying, where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover? He said, go into the city to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says, my time is near. At your house, I am to keep the Passover with my disciples. The disciples did as Yeshua had ordered them, and they prepared the Passover. So when we look at the Synoptic Gospels, along with John's Gospel, there is a little discrepancy, if you will, and commentators and Bible scholars, they've been really poring over those discrepancies as to when Yeshua celebrates Pesach with his Talmudim. Well, we know according to Exodus 12, we talked about that at the beginning, that according to Exodus 12, Pesach was instituted on the 14th of Nisan, right? That Nisan is the Hebrew month, the first Hebrew month in the ecclesiastical calendar, if you will. So on the 14th of Nisan, Pesach was instituted, according to Exodus 12. Now, if you wanted to eat of the Paschal lamb and to have a Paschal lamb for your house, you had to make sure that you were in Jerusalem by the 10th of Nisan, because this is when you selected the lamb, and this lamb was brought into your household to live with you for 4 days until Nisan 14. And then, of course, it was slaughtered on Nisan 14. Now, basically, the first day of Matzah, according to verse 17, is the day that the matzah was purged from the house, right? This is when the whatever leaven was still there, they made sure that there was no leaven in the house. And so even the understanding of Yeshua is saying to his Talmudim, let's find a place where we can hold our Pesach Seder. Well, it's got to be a place that is totally purged. But the disciples would have gone in and purged whatever leaven that was still there. So Pesach, as we said, was established in Exodus 12. And we know, as we said earlier, that it commemorates the freeing of the Jews from Egyptian slavery, which is so key because we're going to take a look at something that Yeshua embellishes with Pesach. And it shows us, again, their establishment as a nation and as the people of God. Pesach, they come out of Egypt, they come as a nation, they come as a people of God, and this establishes them as such. So the central event, we know that, of the original Passover was a slaughter by each Jewish family of a lamb, and that lamb had to be without blemish. And then if they did that, smeared the blood on the doorposts, then God spared the firstborn sons of the Israelites, but slew those of the Egyptians. So the Last Supper that we're getting into now is understood by most scholars to have been a Pesach meal or a Pesach Seder. What we see Yeshua doing here is deepening the themes of Pesach, right? He's deepening the themes. He's reinforcing some things. He's giving new levels, right, of meaning to the events, or by the events that occurred in his life. He's giving new levels of meanings to those, to the Seder and to the Seder elements. And so by his words that he speaks to them that night, they get a greater understanding of what Yeshua is intending. So, and so what's interesting here is, as we take a look at this, John is very definite in not saying that this was a Seder, right? Matthew, Luke, and John, or Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they clearly let us know that this is a Seder. So how do we reconcile that? Well, Joseph Shulam was born in Sofia, Bulgaria, and he's a Messianic Jewish believer. He was born in 1946, and he was born to a Sephardic Jewish family. So he suggested this, that it may not have been the Seder as we know of the Seder in Exodus 12, but it's what is called a Seudat Mitzvah. It's the celebratory banquet accompanying the performance of a commandment. So you perform a commandment, like maybe a Brit Milah, and after that, you have a Seudat Mitzvah. And some would say that it was a training Seder that Yeshua was having with his Talmudim. So here's the background for the argument. So when a rabbi and his students finish studying a tractate of the Talmud, they celebrate with a Seudat Mitzvah, right? A banquet of completion, like a graduation. Wow. I mean, that would just illuminate this event so much. And we know that there's the fast of the firstborn that occurs just before Pesach. And this is where you express gratitude for the saving of Israel's firstborn sons from the 10th plague. So when you had a Seudat Mitzvah, it took precedence over a fast. So this tradition of the fast of the firstborn dates at least from the Mishnaic times. But Shulam reasons this, that if it goes back a couple of centuries more to the time of Yeshua, and if the Seudat Siyum custom applied in the first century to the completing of any course of study, then Yeshua might have arranged to have himself and his Talmudim finish reading a book of the Tanakh on Nisan 14. Really, after 3 years of study with Yeshua, this was the end, if you will, of their study with him as he is with them in the flesh. That's the end of their study. Yes, he will continue to teach them, but this completes the end of his study with them in the flesh. So since Yeshua knew he was going to die, he may have regarded it as appropriate to complete his disciples' earthly course of study. Luke is the only one who says this portion. Luke says that when Yeshua gets with his disciples, he says, I have desired with great desire to have this Pesach Seder with you, right? This is the culmination of study with you on this side in the earth, but you're going to go into, you will be a perennial student, but from my tutelage with you here on this side, it has come to an end. So that kind of solution would resolve this conflict between Yochanan saying that it wasn't a Seder, basically, and the Synoptic Gospels saying that it was, right? But most of the Jewish the New Testament commentary notes on the Last Supper, when you take a look at the Jewish New Testament commentary, they assume that this was a Passover Seder. So we know this, that Yeshua's last Seder conforms to a typical Seder as reported in the Mishnah. There are multiple cups of wine that they drink. They break the unleavened bread. They dip it in vinegar. There's a morsel given to Iscariot, and there's a singing of the hymn at the end. So we know that Pesach is considered the festival of matzah. So the first day, the Erev Pesach, you have the finding of the leaven in the home. Then on Pesach, it's not considered a Shabbaton where there's like a no work day. And then you have the 7 days of unleavened bread. The first day of unleavened bread is a Shabbaton. And then the last day, the 7th day, is a Shabbaton. So you have all of that going on at the time. But you eat the unleavened bread throughout the festival, Pesach to the 7th day. So the day before the festival begins, as we said, is when the last chametz must be removed from the house and burned. And from that moment on, the only bread found in the house will be matzah. It's the only bread found in the, once you relieve that, you take out that last grain of leaven, the only bread you will find is matzah. So the first day of matzah is the day before the start of Pesach, and they're clearing out the leaven from their homes. Since according to the Jewish calendar, the day begins at sundown, what this means is that the chametz is burned around mid-morning, and Pesach commences with the Seder service after the sun has set. Okay, we know that Seder means order. It refers to the ordered ceremony and the meal that would usher in the week of Pesach, which includes, of course, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So the sequence of events today, we've got prayers and recitals and foods to be eaten, and all of that is set forth in what is called the Haggadah. Haggadah means telling. So it recounts the whole biblical story of the Exodus from Egypt. And of course, it has a lot of rabbinical embellishments because eventually the temple is destroyed. What do we do now with the Hagigah? What do we do now with the Pesach? How do we commemorate those things? Especially since Pesach is one of the Moedim, and it is to be celebrated le'olam va'ed, forever and ever. So So what Yeshua does at his Seder, those were already in vogue. So Yeshua is doing what they would normally do. He's following a Jewish Seder, Jewish household. This is what is done. So let's take a look now at chapters or verses 20 through 25 in chapter and Matthew 26. Now, when it was evening, Yeshua was reclining at the table with the 12. As they were eating, he said, Amen. I tell you, one of you will betray me. Wow. What a way to begin, right? And being very sorrowful, they began each one to say to him, I'm not the one, and my master. And he replied, the one who dipped his hand in the bowl with me, he's the one who will betray me. The Son of Man indeed goes, just as it is written about him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. And Judah, the one betraying him, replied, I am not the one, am I, Rabbi? Yeshua said to him, you've said it yourself. So first of all, we see Yeshua reclining, and that's very key to the Seder, right? Because one of the 4 questions that the children will sing at the Seder, right, the Manish Tanah, one of the questions is, on all other nights, we eat our meals, either sitting or reclining. Why on this night do we all recline? We have some amazing kids out here and young people, Yeladim, in our audience, and they sang the Manish Tanah at our Seder. So I want to give a shout out to them. Wow. Did I just do the shout out? Okay, I'm going to give a shout out to them. So let's look at this. Actually, I got all these sparkles on my screen when I said that. Okay, back to the lesson. So one of the 4 questions is, on all other nights, we eat our meals either sitting or reclining. Why on this night do we all recline? The answer is that at the time the questions were fixed in the Seder liturgy, the slaves ate sitting or standing, while only free Roman citizens reclined. And in addition to that, right, in Egypt, they were told to be ready. They couldn't recline. They had to have their shoes on, staff in hand, their backpacks on their backs. They had to be ready to go when it was time to leave Egypt. But reclining represents freedom from Egyptian slavery. So during the Seder, you recline. Now, so as they were eating, he said, I tell you, one of you will betray me. And being very sorrowful, they began. All of them were sorry, and they all wanted to know, is it I, Lord? Is it I? Am I the one who will betray you? And Yeshua says, the one who dips in the dish with me. Now, the one who dipped, once again, we wanted to establish that Yeshua has all of the elements of the Seder, because he tells his Talmudim to prepare the Seder meal for us. And if this is a practice Seder or a celebratory Seder, then what would be missing, of course, would be the Pesach. But we will get to that. So he dips his matzah in the dish. Well, that dish could have been the charoset. This is the apple nuts mixture that was normally on the table, or it could be the maror. Maror would be the bitter herbs. Both of those are used in services today. Now, the charoset, we know that's that sweet paste made of fruit, nuts, spices, and wines, and it speaks back to the mortar that the Israelites used or made in Egypt as they were building these granaries and these storehouses for Pharaoh. So these bitter herbs, the maror, of course, indicated the bitterness of slavery under Pharaoh. Today, the horseradish root or lettuce is used as maror. And of course, it's very important that at that time, you use the most pungent maror that you could find. Because once again, it speaks back to what Yeshua said. Can you imagine? One of you is going to betray me. That's bitterness. That's maror. And all of them wanted to know, is it I? Is it I? Am I the one who's going to betray you? And so in verse 24, he says, the Son of Man indeed goes, just as it is written about him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. So the Son of Man will die, just as the Tanakh, the prophets, what is called the Old Testament or the Old Covenant, but more specifically, the prophets say how he will die. And this is what Yeshua is alluding to, because we need to understand this. The prophets wrote about Yeshua, then Yeshua comes, and when Yeshua comes, he speaks back to what they wrote. Why? Because they wrote about him. So he speaks back to that, and he says, the Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written about him. So he's alluding to the prophets, even the writings, right? Some of the Psalms, the Messianic Psalms speak of how the Messiah is going to die. So it includes the prophecies and the manner of death that he will die at his first coming. So it is, we need to understand this, though, that Yeshua believed that God had divinely ordained his martyrdom, if you will. It was done. It was written about. God had ordained it. Evidence in the prophecies about Messiah point to the fact that God had ordained it. And once again, when we talk about these choices, did Judas have a choice? When we begin to see who Judas was, that he was susceptible to greed, according to Matthew, that he allowed Hasatan to enter, according to Luke and John, and that as he did that, it gave way to the Yetzer Hara. Each one of us, we have a Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. We have a Yetzer HaTov, we have a good inclination. Which one will we feed? Which one will we allow the Ruach HaKodesh to feed? And which one would Judas allow Yeshua to feed? Now he has subjugated himself now to Hasatan, to the adversary. So let's take a look at these. I'm just going to go over them and not really the locations of them, but this is what the Tanakh says about the Messiah and how he will die and how Yeshua at this point knows he will die. First of all, it says that he will be hated without a cause. What's the reason for hating Yeshua? He brought love, he brought healing, he brought teaching, he brought an understanding of the kingdom. What was the cause? He was rejected by the rulers. Why? Why was he rejected by the rulers? Were they threatened by him? Were they jealous of him? Did that unseat their being in cahoots with Rome? What was it? Why did the religious leaders reject him? And we clearly see Caiaphas, we really see some of the chief priests, the Nasim, some of them, these elders, rejecting Yeshua. He was betrayed by a friend already. The scripture says, I could have borne it if it had been my enemy, but it was mine own familiar friend who did lift up his heel against me. So he's betrayed by a friend. Judas had been with him for 3 years, had seen everything, the miracles, had heard all of the teachings. And now he betrays Yeshua for 120 days' wages. He was sold for 30 pieces of silver. It clearly tells us that. He was subject to having price given for a potter's field. Zechariah says, that 30 shekels of silver, why don't you give it to the potter? Well, that's what happens with the 30 pieces of pieces of silver that was used to purchase, to pay for the bribe for Judas. He was forsaken by his Talmudim, and we're going to see that they all run away. And when he says that one of you will betray me, they're all heartbroken about this. He was struck on the cheek. He was spat on. He was mocked. He was beaten. All of this is in the Tanakh. He was executed by crucifixion, having hands and feet pierced. He was executed without having a bone broken. He was thirsty during his execution, so they gave him vinegar to quench his thirst. He was considered a transgression, right? He was buried with the rich when he was dead. He was the one whose death would atone for the sins of mankind. He was raised from the dead. He ascended to the right hand of God. He was cut off, but not for himself, according to Daniel. So Yeshua's prophetic destiny, even though it was prophesied, and it was prophesied because it was true. And Judas now still having this choice, but because of who he was, because of the greed, because of giving over to Hasatan, he becomes this traitor. But Yeshua's prophetic destiny does not exonerate the traitor. Judas can't go free. He is not exonerated because it was there in scripture, right? And so Yeshua says in verse 24, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. Wow. So, First Enoch 38:2 says this, and when the righteous one shall appear, when there will be the dwelling of the sinners, and where the resting place of those who have denied the Lord of spirits, it would have been good for them had they not been born. That kind of thinking is definitely part of Jewish thought, Jewish thinking, rabbinic thought, because here we see in Leviticus Rabbah 35:7 something very similar. How Jewish teachers also uttered such sayings, as it would be better for that person not to have been born. For example, if this is what is in Leviticus Rabbah 35:7. If one's first words after waking are not from Torah, it would have been better for him if the afterbirth in which he lay had been turned over his face, and he had never been born and beheld the world. Wow. If one's first words after waking are not from Torah, it's almost like it's better that you had not been born. But that kind of language, and Yeshua speaks it. He speaks this language to his Talmudim, and they would have understood it, and they would have understood the direness of it, the severity of it. And he says, it would have been better for that man if he had not been born. Once again, they're maybe eating the maror, the bitterness. And can you imagine the bitterness of the one who betrayed Yeshua? Yes, because it's painted for us, it's told for us in black and white, the bitterness that Judas endured. And even Shimon Kepha, by his denying, it's like denying Yeshua, he endures bitterness as well. And here's something I thought, and I think Matthew might be the one who actually says this. I don't think the other gospels say this, but Matthew does. And this is what Matthew says in verse 25 of Matthew 26. And Judas, the one betraying him, replied, I'm not the one, am I, Rabbi? Yeshua said to him, "You've said it yourself." Wow. If it had already entered into his heart to betray him, to betray Yeshua, and Judas is asking this question, what is in his heart? What is in his mind? Is he trying to be like the others in thinking or causing Yeshua to think he is not the one? But Yeshua knows. And there was actually one commentary that commented on the fact that Judas calls him rabbi, that he sees him as a teacher and doesn't call him Lord, which means master, right? The one to whom I have an allegiance, but he just sees him as rabbi. But he carries on this pretense of ignorance when it was already in his heart to do it. And he asked him, "It's not me, is it, Rabbi? It's not I, it is not I." Yeshua says, "You've said it yourself." And in verse 26, now while they were eating, Yeshua took matzah. And after he offered the bracha, he broke and gave to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." So the piece of matzah here may have been that which was eaten immediately prior to the meal, because you're eating matzah throughout the meal. If so, Yeshua said the normal blessing over bread. All right. Okay, you guys gonna help me say the normal blessing over bread? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So he would have given the regular bracha over the bread, and followed by something like this: "Praised are you, Adonai our God, King of the universe, who has made us holy through his commandments and has commanded us concerning the eating of matzah." So especially here, concerning the eating of matzah, this is a command during Pesach. And so Yeshua possibly could have said that. So in the modern Seder, you've got 3 pieces of matzah that are placed in a cloth. Okay, I have some for you here. And that cloth is usually what is called the matzah tash, right? And so early in the service, they would have taken this so that you have your first piece of matzah, and then you have your second piece of matzah, and then you have a third piece of matzah that is indeed here. Okay. All right. Here's the second piece, right? And that's usually broken. So you break the second piece like so. Oh, better to do it this way. So you break the second piece and you wrap that in a napkin, and that is hidden. And then, of course, the children find it later on, and that's called the afikomen. And some say it's a Greek word meaning dessert. Some say it's a word that means coming after. But whatever it is, there's that afikomen that is part of the meal. Now, when we take the 3 pieces here, usually in the typical Seders, they will say that one piece, the first piece represents the priests. Second piece represents the Leviim, the Levites, and the third represents Israel. So, so everyone in Israel, not in the first 2 categories, but everyone in Israel, of course, is in the last one. So they believe that this was a ritual added to the Seder service later on. But the 3 matzot in Messianic Seders, they usually look at it as representing Father, Son, Ruach HaKodesh in Messianic Seders. But the second matzah, it is believed representing the Son. But you take a look at it, it's pierced and striped, and just as Yeshua himself was pierced and striped. So there's this mystery that this afikomen is taken and hidden away. And then at the end of the meal, it appears. Just as Yeshua, even historically, right? He is hidden away right now, but at the end of the age, he will appear. So, and also representing Yeshua, buried in the sepulcher, and then he appears. So let's take a look at verse 27. And he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave to them, saying, drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the removal of sins. But I say to you, I will never drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom. So according to a lot of scholars, this seems to be the third cup. We know that there are usually 4 cups drunk during a Seder. Luke is the only one who mentions 2 cups. The other Gospels mention 1 cup. But this seems to be, as you take a look at the chronology of all of the Besserot, all of the Gospels, this is more likely the 3rd cup, the cup of thanksgiving, the cup of redemption. Now, Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 10:16. He says, the cup of blessing that we bless, isn't it a sharing of Messiah's blood? The bread that we break, isn't it a sharing of Messiah's body? So that Paul, by 60 CE, understands what Yeshua has instituted, right? Because remember what we said, that as Yeshua has his Passover Seder, he's embellishing the meaning of each of those elements. And now Paul gets it, and he says, look, the cup of blessing that we bless, that's a sharing of Messiah's blood. And the bread that we break, that's a sharing of Messiah's body. So Yeshua took a cup after they had eaten. So it shows us again the cup after the meal, after they had eaten. And he took the cup of wine, and we're going to get our studio audience to say the bracha with us as he took the cup of wine, and he would have said, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. And so we can be sure that Yeshua used this traditional blessing. Why? Because he says, fruit of the vine. It's literally there in the Greek. He says, fruit of the vine. So he took the wine of Passover. Well, when we take the wine of Passover, we do it in remembrance of him. Very, very powerful, because remember, he's investing new symbolism into the Passover ceremony. Does that mean that the old symbolism is done away with? No, it does not. But he is investing new symbolism. So it's not a new ritual, right? He did not replace the previous associations of the bread and the wine, because when they drank the 4 cups before this moment, they remembered their salvation from Egypt. And Passover was ordained as a memorial of the Exodus. So Hashem says, when you do this, you tell the story about coming out of Egypt. It's a memorial of coming out of Egypt. Henceforth, the cups of Passover should also be in remembrance of him. So everything, during Seders now, you remember the Exodus, you remember Yeshua, you remember his blood, you remember his body, you remember his sacrifice. But he makes a vow. Yeshua makes a vow. He says, I will never drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it anew with you in the Father's kingdom. And there's all of this dialogue about whether or not, if he made a vow then, well, what about the next cup? But clearly in Jewish understanding that if you bless something, you have to partake of it. So Yeshua is speaking futuristically after this Seder. He says, I'm not going to drink of this again until I drink it with you, until there is that banquet of the Lamb, until I'm seated with you, and then I will drink it. And this is so interesting. And Luke 22:20 says, in the same way, he took the cup after the meal, saying, this cup is a new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. This is the new covenant in my blood. He took this after the meal, right? So it shows you that this was a different cup from the others. Okay, so as he does this, he's invoking 3 passages that have to do with the covenant. Let's take a look at those. First of all, Exodus 24. He's invoking this when he says, this is the blood, right, of the new covenant. Well, what is he referring to? Remember in Exodus 24, it gives the rituals of the blood covenant ceremony at Mount Sinai, where Moses says he sprinkles the blood of the covenant upon the people. So that was the original wedding ceremony between God and Israel. And when Israel accepted the terms of the Torah, Moses splashed the people with sacrificial blood and declared, behold the blood of the covenant, which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. That's Exodus 24:8. And Yeshua, in doing this, is also alluding to Jeremiah 31. Because what is he describing? He's describing the promise of the new covenant of the Messianic era. This is what he says in Jeremiah 31, and 33. Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Listen, he's making, the days are coming, the day is here. Yeshua is making this covenant with them, right? And remember, he makes it with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. That's who's involved in this covenant. And we become a part of this new covenant when we are engrafted into Yisrael. And then he's alluding also to Zechariah 9. It's a passage heavy with messianic prophecies. And this is what he declares. Because of the blood of my covenant with you, I have set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. So Yeshua, just by taking that wine and saying, this is the blood of the covenant, and by taking that matzah and saying, this is my body broken for you, he's alluding to these covenantal passages. So Yeshua, by saying this, what he says at the Seder, he is indicating that he is the agent to bring about the new covenant. He, the Messiah, he's the only one who can do it. So the new covenant will not be sealed by sacrifices, but by his own martyrdom. It won't be the blood of bulls and goats. It will be Yeshua's martyrdom. His blood, which is poured out, refers to the blood of martyrs, right? In other words, it's an idiom for a sacrificial death. So Yeshua understood the messianic prophecies of Isaiah 53. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. So he understood all of that. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is dumb. So he opened not his mouth. But he also knew this. He also knew Pharisaic theology. And I want you to understand this as you're putting on your Jewish lenses. This is Pharisaic theology. It's about the tzaddik. It's about the righteous person. The death of the righteous atones for sin. The death of the righteous atones for sin. And that's why the Hebrews writer says, if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of heifers sprinkling upon the unclean sanctifies to the purifying of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Messiah, right? He's a righteous tzaddik. How much more? It will atone forever, right? Forever. once and for all, atonement forever. So from that whole theological matrix, he spoke of his spilled blood providing forgiveness for sins. And let me just share with you, Pesach is not about forgiveness for sins. Pesach was about deliverance from Egypt. Pesach was about deliverance from sins, deliverance, but the forgiveness of sins. Yeshua takes on all of that when he speaks of his blood, because how much more will the blood of Messiah? It will do so much more than the blood of bulls and goats. So the wine in the cup does not, and just to say that it does not miraculously become human blood. We know that. Rather, it symbolizes Yeshua's willing sacrificial death. No man takes my life, I lay it down, right? He was willing to do this. In 1 Corinthians 11:26, for as often as you drink the cup, you proclaim the master's death until he comes. So that's what we're proclaiming. That's what we're declaring. That's what we're commemorating, right? In the Zikronit, when we do this. So Yeshua has not asked his disciples to eat his body and drink his blood. We know that. He has asked them to recognize his messianic mission in the shared bread and the atoning covenantal value of his death in the shared cup. So according to Mark Evans in his Messiah journal, he's not saying eat literally his body, drink literally his blood. Recognize my mission. Share with me in this covenant, right? So what does he mean when he says he will drink new wine? Well, let's just look at this, and this is where we'll end this section. Rabbi Lichtenstein, a Messianic Jewish believer who wrote a commentary on the New Testament, he says this, it's very interesting. He says, the fruit of the vine will be new because the creation will be renewed into a different mode than it is now. For everything will become new, in a sense, more spiritual than it is now. Everything will be from the divine aspect. And in the Talmud, in Berachot 34b, we find that they believe that there would be wine preserved in its grapes from the 6 days of creation. Perhaps the intent of this word new is that the preserved wine will be new with no change at all, perfectly preserved, coming from the 6 days of creation. Very interesting midrash there, that this new wine that Yeshua says, I won't drink it until I drink it with you anew, right, in the kingdom, that there's this idea that from creation, God has been preserving wine. Well, you know, wine gets better with age. Can you imagine wine being preserved since the 6th day of creation up until the time that we drink it with Yeshua in the kingdom? It's just beyond imagination. But this very interesting, this new Messiah establishing the new covenant promised to the Jewish people in Jeremiah 31:30. This is what he's establishing. And we read that. Behold, days are coming. It is a declaration of Adonai when I will make a new covenant, a renewed covenant. And we're going to talk about those covenants where we're going to see that one covenant doesn't replace another. And we're going to talk about those in our next session. So I hope that you are with us then. But we just are so blessed by what Yeshua did. He says, I have desired, guys. This is what he tells his Talmudim. You know how I have desired to have this Seder with you. Why? Because now it ends our teaching here. And now it catapults you into a whole new dimension of your walk in the kingdom, of your work in the kingdom, of your partnership with me in the kingdom. And we have this partnership today, beloved. We have choices to make. Every day there's a choice. And I would encourage you to make a choice for the kingdom of God. The kingdom is here. And I don't know about you, but I want to sit with Yeshua in the kingdom when he drinks with us anew. He says, I'm waiting on you to drink with you. I'm waiting on you. So let's do the mitzvot. Let's serve Messiah. Let's serve God. Let's walk according to the dictates of Torah. And let's do all that we can to hasten the day of Messiah Yeshua. God bless you all. Shalom uvarecha. Peace and blessings to you. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen v'amen.